First of all, I would like to thank you wholeheartedly. You faced a tough task. That was difficult. You might have suffered quite a bit, but you have at least this to demonstrate that you were keen on handling a very difficult topic. For me, sanctions are power politics of the worst kind and nothing else. And there is no discussion on legality, there is no discussion on the efficacy. I was the first one to publish in French the conclusions of the Watson Institute a long time ago already. And they were establishing the fact that countries imposing sanctions usually have a GDP 200% higher than those suffering from sanctions. Your book was published in 25. You have a small paragraph on Switzerland. You have a list of countries under Swiss sanctions, and also in the main one, Russia. Switzerland dared impose sanctions with the EU on Russia. In your next edition, please add Russia to the list of people under sanctions from Switzerland. And this has triggered a huge discussion in Switzerland. That is to say, we will vote next year on Swiss neutrality, and the problem of sanctions will be decisive on whether we keep or not the Swiss neutrality. So what is, I have no specific questions, but I wanted to congratulate you, and I want to say that sanctions are really not a proper way to deal with international problems and politics. There are many other ways you know of, but unfortunately the world is such that imposing sanctions is a way to proceed with your power politics, and I'm no surprise to see who is imposing sanctions and who is receiving them. I guess you might agree with that, or disagree.
Thank you very much for your comment. Eventually, as I have said, this book is the first step. It's very problematic now to find people who are ready to do the research. You would be surprised to know how many scholars prefer not to talk publicly and what are the negative consequences if they talk publicly. I can only mention for example, the facts which are very broadly available online, and I will cite I believe, upon my opinion, a ridiculous case when the former rector of Tallinn University, Nord Rhein-Müllersen, who is very, very known, and who participated and did a speech in St. Petersburg Legal Forum last summer, all of a sudden lost his emeritus professor status in Tallinn University because, and the Tallinn University did a ridiculous statement, upon my opinion. They said, we withdrew the status not because what exactly he said, because he participated in the event in Russia, and we believe it's still within the academic freedom. As a lawyer, I do not understand the connection between academic freedom and withdrawing status of emeritus professor because of participating in the conference in Russia. Moreover, he didn't even advocate on behalf of Russia or Russian politics. He just did a statement at that conference. And the number of cases which can be cited, number of messages I received from Western scholars saying, we would be happy to share, but we are scared. What scares me a lot is the fact that now many scholars are scared even to share confidentially with me when their names are not mentioned. And as a result, I will give you again public information. I was doing a country visit to China last May, and I was willing to verify the facts and figures about the disruption of academic relations and the projects between Chinese and European universities. and European scholars who agreed immediately to talk to me, again, confidentially. Names are not mentioned. Universities are not mentioned in the report. All of them sent me a message the next day saying, we have been advised not to talk to you, even confidentially. And therefore, that's why I'm happy to announce that my this year report to the UN General Assembly will be on the impact of UCMs on academic freedoms and right to education. So everyone is call for contributions is public. Everyone who is ready to share confidentially or non-confidentially is welcomed to contribute. I will try to reflect information as comprehensively as only possible.
Because I'm publishing a book on Swiss sanctions next year.
That's good.
I have a good life insurance. And I already stay in France.
Therefore, in reality, it's a huge problem. Moreover, when we talk about countries under sanctions, quite often many people appear to be in the survival mode. When I did a country visit to some countries, like for example Venezuela or Zimbabwe, the salary of people dropped to zero, or it comes to €2 per month, up to 10 euros per month. It's not enough even to buy your food in Venezuela, for example. And therefore, people have 5-10 jobs just to cover the basic expenses of their families, and they do not focus much on that elements. That's why I'm always advocating that countries shall encourage the research in different areas and try to support the scholars so that they can invest in further development of academic knowledge in different areas of law. So I really hope, I see that the development starts. I was very pessimistic even 3 years ago, but now I see that more and more publications coming. And again, I believe that sanctions research platform shall encourage that because people can read publications and people can upload publications. Additionally, the monitoring platform shall add an additional layer because you will see the figures and you will see the impacts. Eventually, I need to mention that there has never ever been any single system to monitor and assess impact of sanctions. The only document ever existed was the report prepared by IASC and OCHA in 2004 to assess impact of sanctions of the UN Security Council on Iraq. It was specific case, specific sanctions, and lots of resources invested into that. The mandate is currently trying to establish a comprehensive system. It's already involved for 2 years of the research on the topic, and therefore assistance from all stakeholders is welcomed, and even for NGOs. It's possible to fill the platform for every single individual. It's fully open on the confidential basis, and I believe if we collect facts and we collect the patterns of impediments, it will help us to demonstrate the impact. Although I like your idea very much, indeed, we need to have more articles and we need to cover the situation much broader.
One of the things that I like about these kinds of meetings is that they get the thoughts flowing in new ways. And one of the things that you just said made me think that perhaps something like the sanctions research platform that you and your mandate created could have a section to receive and promote research that is anonymous from people who would be penalized if they were associated with the research that they did at a personal level, like the Tallinn emeritus professor, for example. Somebody like that could upload research anonymously, and at such time that the danger of exposure is lifted, the identity could be made known. But in the meantime, if it is recognized to be academic quality research, perhaps there's a space for this research, because the research is almost more important than the individuals who did it. They just happen to be the ones looking at it. Their names may lend strength to the credibility, but denying the world the benefit of their work might be more serious.
Thank you very much for your comment. Let's say I was thinking about that option, but at the very end I decided not to do it. However, I will explain why. The idea was how to establish the open platform with the possibility to benefit from publications already there, and the possibility to upload your own publication, but to avoid tuning it into unverified politicized tool. We do not do any censorship. So there are UN documents, officials, publications which have already been published. So we have all copyrights fully respected, and reports of non-governmental organizations. If we, it's not censorship, the only checking what we are doing, we do not allow for any political statements. Because if we remove the names of persons, we have a risk that we do not know who is sending what. We need to know that it's a publication or it's a research which can be attributable to anyone. The mandate, unfortunately, I'm sure that people do not know. Under the resolution, I continue to work at my regular place of work, and I'm entitled to one staff only. So due to extra budgetary contribution, I have 2 consultants, and that's all our incredibly huge team which is doing all the work. So with that limited resources, we definitely do not have, and I believe it's good, we are not authorized to do a review about academic quality. However, there are other options. First of all, every year I publish calls for contributions. And within these calls for contributions, I'm welcoming all information. And there is a possibility to identify whether a person wants to keep the submission confidential. So that's fully allowed under the standards of special procedures. I will use the information in the report, and in the note, it will be confidential submission. So neither name of the person nor affiliation will be revealed. Another possibility is to send me a communication. A person can report about the results of their research and say, we believe that here is an impact on this sphere of human rights. And as a special rapporteur, I can do a communication to address a specific country. There is third possibility, which I have already mentioned, and that is a monitoring tool. The purpose of the monitoring tool is not only to demonstrate the facts. It's like a very simple fact. For example, you see the country and you monitor the mortality rate of infants under 5. And you see that the mortality rate increases. It's just figures. You do not know whether it increases because the country restructured the budget and doesn't invest into healthcare. Or it might be increasing due to the fact that in the face of unilateral sanctions, it's just not possible to procure necessary medical equipment, spare parts, and medicine to make sure that these children receive necessary vaccination and they receive necessary medical assistance. That's why the purpose of the monitoring tool is to provide not figures only, but also the grounds. So there are always like a figure field and open field to be filled, explaining that, for example, this type of medicine is absolutely not available, although it used to be provided by the government for the previous 20 years, or there were some other ways. So there are therefore 3 possibilities to submit confidential information which will be taken into account and which can be used in the future work.
Good afternoon. I'm Engineer Bernard Cornul. I've I have a long experience of the Middle East, especially Iraq, because I visited it 50 years ago, and even more, and I worked for UNDP and FAO for 3 years. So I had, when the war started, the invasion of course started, and then 2 UN resolutions were imposing very severe blockades. I knew very well the situation. After the ceasefire at the end of February, I was probably the first or one of the first French to visit Iraq. I went to the wholesale market to record all the price of the foodstuff. They were cheaper than France at that time, but the wife of the president went to by helicopter with the minister to supply food by helicopter, costing maybe 7 times the cost of wheat and other sugar and so on. And of course, I wrote the first article on the effect of the sanctions on Iraq because I knew the population very well. I knew the price, I knew the salaries, everything. Then I read this report by the UN, but this UN report, I consider it was just a kind of cover to cover the responsibility of the UN system, especially the Council of Security Council and of course the leader, America, United States, to cover their responsibility on this consequence. I give you an example. One thing that this report doesn't consider or understand, it's very simple. When you put a blockade on the import of goods, of equipment, and so on, what's happened is that you are making jobless people because the factory cannot work, they cannot export. So there is less demand. That's why the price of the food doesn't increase because there is no demand. So even after, for example, when they put the resolution, what we call it, oil for food for oil, of course, Iraq was not, I met Tariq Aziz at that time, Iraq was not willing to that, but France told them, please, please, it will help us that you accept this oil for food program. Then I made an interview, I met some people, a mother with 4 kids, what she said in Iraqi, because I can understand, I just said it in English, they will import more food, but how we will buy it? The problem is not the food supply, the problem is the salary. So the blockade, they reduce the possibility of job, possibility of manufacturing, everything. So this is the case. And it was not even understood by this 600-page report by the UN. And I know one of the staff. He was at that time UNESCO consultant. He came at the start of the war, he came to one of meeting against the blockade. And he said it's very bad blockade. But after that, when it was paid by the UN to report, he changed his mind. It changed the approach, and he was speaking not honestly about the consequence of the report. So, of course, the problem is the issue is the responsibility of the big power imposing sanction for political purpose. And this is difficult to write it, as you mentioned. People are afraid to talk against big powers. And I just to finalize, I say one quote of ex-Minister of Foreign Affairs, Claude Chesson. He's like me, he graduated from Polytechnique. He told me on the 13th, I have his letter, on the 13th July 91, that means a few months after the war, he said that in the future, next future, such a sanction will be seen as a crime against humanity, in 91. Of course, he was prevented. He told me, I can take you to Iraq. He said, at that time, he was a European deputy. He said, they will never authorize me to go to Iraq at this time, But he said, as an ex-minister, he said, this will be seen later on as a crime against humanity. And just one thing, I was invited a few years ago for a training high class of the High Institute for Defense Studies in France to report. They had the training about the UN sanction. So they invite me to talk. I told them that I made hunger strike for 3 weeks. I refused to pay the income tax in France for 7 years before they seized my property, my bank account, my salary, everything, But then when I made my speech, everybody, officer, diplomat, they say like this, Maybe say 7 years or 15 years after the event. So this is the geopolitical purpose. What has to be changed? The role of the veto power. That's all.
Thank comment, I would like, and I'm very glad that you mentioned the issue of the economy, inflation, as well as impact on economic, social rights and the labor rights. Indeed, I have observed the same impact in all my country visits and reflected in my country visit reports. And due to the same reason, again, I already issued a call for contribution, and the report for the Human Rights Council this year will have a focus of impact unilateral sanctions on economic rights, labor rights, and social rights. And therefore, if you would like to share your views, you are definitely welcome to contribute, because I see the incredible impact in that sphere. And unfortunately, I need to accept the same fact. I quite often after my country visits, after my speeches, I try not to open Twitter, because the level of the hate speech, including distribution of full labeling in this sphere, is incredibly higher. So up to the level of personal attacks against my family members. But that's a part of the job when you try to reveal the fact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, lady, for your communication. It's rare to hear such a summary about what's happening worldwide, and it's you are straight to the point what's happening now, but it began later before. For me, the problem is a political one. It's a it's a matter of imperialism, of domination. The person who are in a position to distribute labels, this one is terrorist, this one is anti-democratic, this one is this are especially the rogue state, the people who are, I will use a word of Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky said, the Republican Party in the US is one of the most corrupt institutions in the world, in the history of the world. And he added another country outside the US. So the problem is that those people who continuously occupied territories, genocided, colonized, still stole people, it's those people who are the biggest rogue states and who decide who is a rogue state. We have Cuba from so long, no embargo till now, and people of Cuba are suffering. So I went to Cuba, and it was hard to find the eggs to prepare a cake for an anniversary. It was at this level. Then you have the same, you have Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, punishment. You have who else? Evo Morales, who is from a leftist and who challenges the policy of the far-right policies of the military rulers under the control of the US. He came here in France in the 50th anniversary of Le Monde Diplomatique. He was invited. And he said, the US called me a Taliban. See? He has nothing to have with the Taliban. But this idea of the US to say all who are not with us is against us, and punishment. Just after 9/11, Wesley Clark, a politician, showed a list of 7 countries, Arab and Muslim countries, and the list is to distract those countries, and only one till now is not distracted, it's Iran, and they are still planning to distract it. It was the case for Yemen, Somalia, Sudan, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Palestine. So that's the horrible things is that those people who decide Belarus is like this, Russia is like this, Ukraine is like this, Burkina Faso is like this, Mali is like this. Those people and put sanction. And now I'll finish with something. It's happening of my home country, Algeria. There was a small problem just between Algeria and France. Algeria was a colony of France during 132 years and got independence after 7 years of a hard war. The problem, I have to summarize it concerning a man who is seen as a writer, a liberal man, a humanist. But this is fake. This man has political position, and he is simply what we can say a pseudonym, an agent of the Mossad. And for this reason, he is a man of the system. He is of the Algerian system. He was never punished because when there was a revolt against the system during 22 months, he never asked to liberate the journalists, the human rights defenders who are imprisoned by the system. He never asked to free them because he's the man of the system. He made all the provocations possible in the beginning of 25 years. He can be punished here in France because of Islamophobia, because of racism, anti-Arab racism, and he is an Arab man. He is not a blonde man with blue eyes, but he is with far-right people that are as far as possible, as far as Genghis Khan. So this man, the problem is between France and Algeria, and there is the former ambassador of France in Algeria, who is a man, a hater of Algeria. He's a man of what we call l'Algérie française, and he will be the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France if Marine Le Pen will win the election. So this is punishment to impose sanctions. How to impose sanctions to Algeria? Why? Because she put in prison a man since November because he said that the Algeria, part of Algeria is not the Algerian territory, it's a Moroccan one. And everybody will do the same if somebody in France say Alsace-Lorraine is not a French territory but a German one. France will punish it. So that's what we are living.
I thank you for your commentary. I just want to say that many elements you addressed to refer to the political situation. What I try to do as a special rapporteur, I try to say that unfortunately political discussion quite often was not able to solve the problem. I, as a mandate holder, try to act as an expert showing legal assessment and factual assessment. And when we have facts and we have legal assessments, the dialogue very slowly, with incredible problems, starts. Recently, I was even surprised how the lawyers dealing with private law start to engage in that. We need to discuss the issue and assess the issue at different levels, and then there could be a way for solution. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation for the Paris Géopolitique Académie, and thank you so much, Madam Special Rapporteur, for your book and for your work. I have a very small and rather simple question. Do we have any chance, I mean, rather legal instrument to stop or reduce this practice of unilateral coercive measures, practice of sanctions? I would like to know what is your rather personal opinion as a lawyer or opinion as a special rapporteur, what kind of instruments could be used, probably at the level of international public law, should be any convention or treaty under the UN, establishing probably the international institution. I saw that there is a possibility to defend, to impose countermeasures, but of course in practice it's not very efficient. What is your opinion?
Well, that's an amazing question, which is, I believe, the broadest of all which have been already asked today. As a very short response is, we do not have any magic wand. But as a longer response, it's not about clapping fingers, using one instrument and solving the problem. It's about using a multiplicity of instruments, some of which are used by diplomats at the political level. And the very first one is trying to address this issue at multiple fora. Because at the moment, I am the only instrument within the UN, one human being, addressing the issue of UCMs, continuing to work as a university professor and bringing up alone 2 children. I'm not enough to solve the problem. However, what I observed in the last few years is that when states act persistently and they bring the issue to UNCTAD, to WHO, to ILO, that might give result. Very slow, very problematic. ILO is very reluctant. WHO is still very reluctant. I tried to talk to UNESCO, referring to a number of economic, cultural, as well as other human rights affected by the unilateral sanctions. I cannot change the situation there, but states can. But only if they understand that it's a long process and it's necessary to remind and push again and again. There was an attempt in September 2024 to include the impact of sanctions to the discussion at the UN General Assembly Summit on Sustainable Development Goals. I sent several letters. A number of countries advocated to include it. It has not been included, and moreover, there were amazing publications afterwards named like Cannibalistic States tried to change the whole system and to include a terrible issue, and only the very last last line was about discussing UCM within SDG Summit. But the whole article was about very propagandistic. But if states do not give up and keep on pushing, the situation, some steps are already happening. So it shall go on further. The second area, which I believe is extremely important, is the development of documents. I do not believe that the adoption of convention is feasible in the nearest future, because we will end up in fully the same situation. Countries which are against sanctions will support it and join. Countries which impose sanctions will not join at all, and there will be no result of that. At the same time, even if we look at the resolutions on my mandate, it's possible to see that they expand. 2 years ago, there was a huge resistance to include the issue of overcompliance and saying overcompliance is violating human rights. Now it's in resolution. No one denies. It's a tiny but a step forward. Now we are discussing this monitoring tool. There was when I launched the project, I tried to involve everyone to develop a monitoring tool, including UN institutions, and the response I received was, it's an extremely ambitious, impossible project, you cannot do it. But now it starts to turn in the reality. And we will have the instrument before I finish to be a mandate holder. So it's already online. It's still, not everything is filled, but we are working on that. Similarly, last November, there was a huge conference in Geneva to discuss guiding principles on sanctions, business, and human rights, and a commentary to that guiding principles. I developed this document along with one of consultants, and the commentary is 130 pages. So in these documents, I didn't invent new legal norms. I tried to demonstrate what exist in treaty and customary norms shall be applied by states, shall be applied by businesses, and I identified what measures can be taken by humanitarian organizations and states to protect against unilateral sanctions and overcompliance. The report which I did for the General Assembly is about the access to justice, and there are some recommendations to states, to businesses, to individuals, and to lawyers. And this is a long list of measures, starting from ICJ and up to commercial arbitrations, which shall be addressed. I also addressed in one of my reports the situation of counter-sanctions. Now more and more countries address this issue. Russia adopted a number of laws, China adopted a number of laws, Belarus adopted some laws, Iran is developing some. What I believe is a problem is that these efforts are dichotomized. I believe that if countries cooperate and make the response systematic and uniform, it will be stronger. Additionally, it's very important, and for example, when I did a country visit to China, I assessed very carefully the counter-sanctions legislation, and I was rather happy to see that in general it conforms the standards of countermeasures. So if response come fully in conformity with international law, it's a very strong argument to show that imposing unilateral sanctions is a violation of international law. But when acting in response legally, that's a right way forward. Countries, it's not the ideal world. We will never live in the world when all countries like each other. They might dislike each other. But if they behave legally, my mandate will not be necessary. So humanitarian impact will disappear because the majority of what is called unilateral sanctions and what is illegal will disappear. So I believe legal steps by states, by businesses, assistance to people trying to advocate to the different types of courts. One of these spheres which I try to advocate for, it's necessary to start bringing cases to the UN treaty bodies about the impact of sanctions. At the moment, there is not a single case of this time, but lives of people are affected. And UN treaty bodies shall deal with human rights violations due to extraterritorial measures too. The Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights issued a number of general comments where it explicitly said that even if a business violates human rights, a state which didn't take measures to prevent or stop these human rights violations is mutually responsible. And that's not my position. It's a position of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Similar approach is taken by the Committee on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And what we see today is basically discrimination on the basis of nationality, country of birth, national origin, as well as any relevance to the specific countries. So no magic wand, no one single instrument, but a multiplicity of instruments which shall be applied and coordinated to be applied consistently. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your speech. I have a question, but maybe I am wrong. Inside, because I discovered now this report or this book, but I don't see the role of INGOs inside the field of humanitarian effect when you have sanctions. And very often you have only 1, 2 players coming from humanitarian organization. And I don't see in the book. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am wrong.
That is a very good question. Eventually, there is one article published by a representative of NGO, Emmanuel Tronc. He is coordinating HESC in Syria. And he is specializing on this area. But the question you asked is extremely important. I have a very broad network of NGOs, humanitarian NGOs, and I have like large meetings with them every for 6 months, but they all request for confidentiality. Humanitarian organizations, I do not mean human rights activists, I mean humanitarian organizations which deliver humanitarian assistance. They are extremely vulnerable. They are vulnerable because as soon as they are claimed to be bad guys, they will not be able to do any fundraising. They already face terrible consequences. Second problem is that in the current process of getting licenses, even for huge NGOs, I mean those with offices in 100 plus countries, to be eligible to participate in any program, they need to be viewed as a good guy. Now, I did several communications concerning challenges to deliver humanitarian assistance, and when I was drafting guiding principles on sanctions, business and human rights, I included there several paragraphs relevant to humanitarian NGOs. What they are facing now, they might face criminal charges. They under all guidances on delivery of humanitarian assistance bear the primary burden of proof of purely humanitarian use of any goods they deliver. It basically means that it's possible to do any allegations. One of the cases which I have been reported about was anecdotal, when the representative of a huge NGO, European-based NGO, his all bank accounts have been blocked because his surname started with letters SYR. And they said, wow, the first 3 letters are like in the word Syria. Although he was Italian, it doesn't matter. Similarly, a few NGOs I work with repeatedly report that as soon as they do any delivery to the country under sanctions, their personal bank accounts are blocked regardless of the nationality. They have been questioned for a loan, so they prefer to stay confidential. At the same time, they start to be more visible. In March 2023, there was a report, so it's not confidential, it's online, prepared and published by Caritas International, World Evangelical Alliance, and I have forgot the third one, together with the Graduate Institute Geneva master students. And that report is about operational and administrative challenges in delivery of humanitarian assistance due to unilateral sanctions and overcompliance. And since recently, many humanitarian NGOs started to speak out publicly about the problem. I had a number of side events where the Secretary General of Caritas International took the floor and publicly spoke about challenges. There is a report done by Oxfam Syria about it's called Switch on the Light, about the challenges to get access to food. There is a huge report done by Oxfam Cuba before it was closed about the impact on women's rights and rights of children. And even some of them even agreed to speak publicly at the ARIA Formula meeting at the UN Security Council about the impediments to deliver humanitarian assistance explicitly authorized by the UN Security Council. I'm currently finalizing editing of the second book after the conference in November about sanctions, business and human rights. And I need to say and have to agree with you. NGOs, 5 different NGOs, decided they will write a single article together because they are still a bit reluctant to have personal responsibility. So there will be like a shared responsibility of 5 different NGOs, but they really want to reveal the challenges they face in their practice and to demonstrate some cases.
No, I thought I would make just a couple of random comments that would seem relevant, that stem from some of the things that people have been saying here in the last hour. One is the overcompliance issue is really becoming a very significant problem. And one of the elements of overcompliance as a phenomenon is we don't know the humanitarian impact of overcompliance versus simple compliance with the sanctions themselves. It may be actually the case that the impact of overcompliance exceeds the impact of simply complying, but we don't know. The other thought was in response to the comment that sanctions perhaps could be equated at times with crimes against humanity. It is, if you look at the consequences, the humanitarian consequences of sanctions, it is arguable that they're precisely the same nature of consequences that the Geneva Conventions were designed to avoid in the context of armed conflict. But sanctions are not armed conflict. And these protections do not exist if the consequences arise from sanctions. But it does seem to open the door for potential prosecution one day of people involved with instituting sanctions for crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, it would require clarity in measuring these consequences, which is something that the Special Rapporteur is trying to establish through the monitoring tool and other things, but we don't have it yet.
Much for this comment. I'm afraid that your comment could start like a new level of discussion for at least a couple of hours. Just a very, very short remark. Many of elements mentioned by Professor Strauss are extremely relevant. Some of them have been reflected in the guiding principles on sanctions, business and human rights due to shifting responsibility from states to businesses to people and vice versa. But at the same time, the mandate is starting to work on developing a guidance on accountability, responsibility, and redress. And naturally, everyone who would like to participate or is willing to contribute is very much welcomed. I would like to thank you once again to the interest to the topic for coming today, for your questions, for the discussion, and would like to reaffirm that the mandate is very open for any interaction. Thanks a lot.